In the quiet lands of the frost-bitten north, under skies streaked with the colors of dawn and the sighs of endless winds, Loki was born. His mother, Laufey, whispered his name to the cold air, a melody of hope and mischief, while his father, Farbati, a giant of stone and shadow, looked on silently. Even before his first breath, the world seemed to bend around him, aware of the child whose mind would dance with cunning and whose heart would carry both fire and shadow. From the beginning, Loki was unlike any other. Where Thor's cries were fierce and Odin's gaze steady, Loki's laughter was soft, almost secretive, curling around the edges of silence. His eyes, bright as the glimmer of distant stars, seemed to understand things unseen, and his fingers moved with the subtle grace of one who could twist reality itself. He wandered the halls of Asgard as a child, small and nimble, unseen by many, yet leaving traces of mischief wherever he went. A cup of mead might tip over, a statue's head might shift ever so slightly, the ravens of Odin might tilt their feathers oddly upon his approach. No harm was intended, but the pattern was unmistakable. Loki's presence was felt even when he was unseen. Thor, older and brimming with strength, noticed the boy one morning as he chased a cloud across the sky. "Who is this?" Thor asked, his voice booming but curious. "He moves like the wind, yet leaves trails of whispers behind him." Odin, seated in silent wisdom, replied only with a knowing glance. "That child is both gift and challenge, strength and shadow. He will teach lessons even the gods cannot foresee." Loki, overhearing this, laughed softly to himself, hiding behind a pillar. He did not yet know the truth of his role, nor the paths he would walk, but already he felt the thrill of possibility, the joy of bending the world just enough to watch it change. As he grew, Loki discovered his talents in earnest. He could shift shapes, becoming fox or bird, mist or shadow. He learned the subtle art of illusion. A wall might appear taller, a door might vanish, or a reflection might whisper secrets only he could hear. With every discovery, his curiosity deepened, and with it, the mischief that would come to define him. Yet there was also a quiet loneliness. Even in the laughter of gods and the warmth of family, Loki often felt apart. His cleverness set him apart from others. His mind moved too swiftly, his curiosity too vast. And so he wandered alone at times, through the forests of Alfheim, along the cliffs of Jotunheim, and over the rivers of Midgard, speaking to the wind and the stars, seeking answers that even the All-Father could not give. The first of many games between Thor and Loki began in these early days. Thor, strong and confident, challenged the boy to a test of strength, expecting the Thunderer's will to be unshakable. Loki, small and sly, twisted the rules with a grin. A stone might seem heavier, a branch might bend in impossible ways. Thor, frustrated yet amused, could not understand how the boy moved so lightly through the world, bending it without force, changing reality with subtlety rather than strength. "Trickster," Thor said finally, laughing despite himself, "you will not learn the ways of thunder with such games." Loki bowed mockingly, his smile secret and bright. "And yet, mighty Thunderer, perhaps you will learn the ways of cleverness from me." Odin observed quietly, the shadow of a smile hidden beneath his gaze. The dance had begun. Two children of power, different in nature yet destined to meet in joy, challenge, and fate. And though the years ahead would bring conflict, laughter, and sorrow, the first sparks of legend had already ignited. As Loki grew, his curiosity carried him beyond the gilded halls of Asgard. Though small and often underestimated, He walked among the new mundos with light steps and a sharp mind, his eyes observing every shadow, every ripple of wind, every whisper of magic in the air. Even the forests of Alfheim seemed to lean closer when he passed, and the creatures of Midgard paused, sensing the cunning spark within him. His first ventures were subtle. A goat lost in Jotunheim found its way home guided by a quiet whisper. A river in Midgard changed course slightly under his touch, sparing a field from flood. Loki's actions were neither cruel nor benevolent. They were experiments, tests of what he could do with his gifts. And with each success, the boy of mischief learned more about the balance between power and consequence. One day, Thor discovered him in a grove of silver trees in Alfheim. The Thunderer, towering and strong, expected confrontation. Yet Loki, perched atop a branch that bent impossibly beneath his weight, laughed. "I wondered if you would find me," he said, eyes glinting like distant stars. "Do you chase storms, or the shadows of your own curiosity?" Thor shook his head, exasperated yet amused. "You are trouble," he said, his voice booming, yet there was warmth beneath it. "And the worlds will feel it one day." Loki hopped from the branch and landed lightly, barely making the leaves rustle. "Perhaps," he said, "but trouble is only a word. I prefer exploration." It was in these wanderings that Loki discovered the depth of his craft. He learned to twist shapes, shift forms, and blend into shadows so completely that even the keenest eyes might pass him by. In Jotunheim, he once disguised himself as a snowdrift to witness the giants' council, listening as they debated storms, fire, and mischief, understanding how the world could be turned not with force but with cleverness. In Svartalfheim, among the dwarves, Loki tested his cunning in subtler ways. He traded riddles for trinkets, illusions for stories, and the dwarves, though clever themselves, found their logic stretched by the boy's tricks. Each success emboldened him, each failure sharpened him. He was learning, as all tricksters must, that every act carries consequence, even when hidden beneath laughter. And in Midgard, Loki discovered the delicate hearts of mortals. He would help a child find a lost toy, only to subtly shift it later, teaching patience and observation. He guided wandering animals back to safety, yet sometimes left them paths that seemed impossible, observing how mortals and beasts solved puzzles of the world. Each interaction, small as it seemed, left traces of wonder, caution, and curiosity in the realms he touched. But Loki's cleverness was not always benign. In his first games with Thor, he learned the thrill of bending the world to his will. Stones would disappear from paths, streams would alter their courses, and Thor, frustrated and baffled, would find himself chasing illusions instead of the boy. Yet these games were never cruel. They were lessons, and often laughter followed, echoing through the forests and halls alike. "Do you think the gods will always forgive you?" Thor asked one day, exasperated after chasing Loki across a frozen lake in Jotunheim. Loki, balancing on a thin sheet of ice, smiled mischievously. "Forgive? Perhaps. But they will remember. And memory is the first step toward legend." Even Odin, observing quietly, allowed the games. He understood that Loki's path would not be easy, that mischief and cleverness could both save and endanger, and that the boy would one day teach lessons the gods themselves could not foresee. As the sun set over Alfheim's golden trees and Midgard's distant mountains shimmered in twilight, Loki paused atop a cliff. The winds whispered secrets to him. Rivers flowing with hidden currents, forests murmuring old tales, stars blinking messages across the night sky. In that quiet moment he felt the first true stirrings of destiny. He was not merely a trickster. He was a force of change, a shadow in motion, a spark of unpredictability in a world of order. And though his path would be tangled with mischief, challenge, and often sorrow, Loki understood something essential even as a child. The world would bend to those who dared to question it, who dared to play within its threats, and who dared to embrace both light and shadow within themselves. And so began the tale of Loki, child of mischief, wanderer of worlds, and master of secrets yet untold. The 9 realms would tremble and laugh alike in his presence, for every shadow, every whisper, and every twist of fate carried the imprint of his clever hands. Loki's cleverness grew with each passing season, and soon the small games of his childhood evolved into schemes that could alter the flow of the 9 realms. He discovered that even gods, mighty and eternal, were not immune to subtle influence. A misplaced gem, a whispered rumor, a small illusion. These could set mighty halls into turmoil or create laughter in unexpected places. In Asgard, he once exchanged a harmless illusion for Odin's throne room. A tapestry appeared to move, the walls shimmered, and even the All-Father, wise as he was, paused in contemplation of what had changed. Thor burst in, hammer raised, expecting chaos, yet found Loki perched calmly atop a pillar, grinning. "You trickster!" Thor roared, though the edge of his voice held amusement. "Will you never cease your games?" Loki bowed low, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Games are only a mirror of what the world can be, brother. Even gods must see their reflections, twisted or not, to understand themselves." One of Loki's first major adventures took him to Svartalfheim, home of the dwarves. There, he traded riddles for enchanted trinkets, borrowed objects that could not be borrowed, and crafted illusions so convincing that even the cleverest of dwarves hesitated in disbelief. Yet Loki learned a lesson. Cleverness could delight, but it could also create anger. A misjudged trick caused a small fire to spread through a workshop, and he narrowly escaped the dwarves' wrath, fleeing into the forests of Alfheim with a laugh that echoed through the treetops. From Jotunheim, he returned stories of giants whose patience was tested by his illusions. Stones would shift under their feet, paths would twist into mazes, fires would flicker mysteriously. Some giants laughed, others roared in frustration. Loki delighted in both, learning that his power lay not in brute strength, but in perception, in bending expectations, and in turning certainty into doubt. In Midgard, Loki's presence was subtler, almost unseen. He would guide travelers through hidden forests, redirecting dangers without their awareness. A child lost in the woods might find a stone carved with a guiding symbol. A river would part just enough for a flock of animals to escape flooding. Even mortals who never glimpsed him felt the subtle influence of his clever hands, a quiet guardian wrapped in mischief. Yet not all consequences were gentle. Loki's games sometimes went awry, creating confusion, fear, or unintended chaos. A misplaced illusion in the palace of Asgard caused temporary havoc. Thor chased shadows, Heimdall raised alarms, and the All-Father's ravens cawed in agitation. Loki observed from afar, understanding that even mischief carries responsibility. A trickster, he realized, must measure laughter against the cost of fear. Among these adventures, Loki discovered companions and rivals alike. Thor remained a constant presence, frustrated, often angry, yet ultimately protective. Their relationship was a dance of contrasts, strength and cunning, thunder and shadow, direct action and subtle manipulation. Where Thor acted boldly, Loki observed and influenced. Where Loki created uncertainty, Thor restored order. Together they shaped each other, a balance of might and mind that would echo across time. Even Odin, distant yet watchful, spoke rarely to Loki, letting the boy explore the breadth of his gifts. A trickster is both danger and teacher, Odin whispered to the winds. He shows what cannot be seen, and reveals truths hidden in the folds of the world. Watch him, but do not restrain him too soon, for every shadow he casts carries the light of understanding. Loki, for his part, began to understand the duality of his nature. Mischief could amuse, could enlighten, could reveal hidden truths, but it could also wound, frighten, or disrupt. Even as a child, he felt the weight of possibility. A single game could ripple across realms, shaping destinies, bending fates, and challenging even the gods themselves. On a quiet night in Alfheim, beneath silver trees and a sky full of stars, Loki whispered to himself, "I am neither wholly good nor wholly evil. I am change, I am shadow, I am the spark that stirs the world. And the worlds will remember me, whether in laughter or fear." And in that moment, the first seeds of legend were sown. A child of mischief, a wanderer of worlds, and a master of secrets, Loki stepped forward into a future that would tremble beneath both his cunning and his cleverness, shaping the 9 realms in ways both subtle and profound. As Loki's cunning grew, so too did the stakes of his games. No longer were his tricks limited to small illusions or playful pranks. He began to meddle with events that affected both gods and mortals. In the golden halls of Asgard, he orchestrated subtle confusions. Messages switched, plans misdirected, and alliances tested. The laughter of mischief now carried echoes of consequence, and Loki felt the weight of responsibility entwined with the thrill of cleverness. One day, Loki altered the course of a messenger bird, sending a note meant for Thor into the hands of the fire giants of Muspelheim. Thor, receiving no warning, rushed headlong into a forest ablaze with molten threats, only to be rescued at the last moment by Heimdall's vigilance. The All-Father's eyes, sharp and unyielding, fell upon Loki. "You are clever," Odin said quietly, his voice carrying both approval and warning. "But cleverness without wisdom can harm the very worlds you claim to play within. Remember, Loki, even shadows have weight, and even whispers can shape storms." Loki bowed with a flourish, a smirk tugging at his lips. "I meant only to test the winds, Father. Perhaps the storms are stronger than expected, but the winds teach, do they not?" Odin's gaze lingered, thoughtful yet stern. "Yes, they teach. And you will learn one way or another, that every act carries its echo." Loki's first true test came soon after, in the forest between Asgard and Midgard. A group of dwarves had crafted a golden treasure, a gift meant to honor the gods. Loki, curious and mischievous, could not resist a small interference. He altered the appearance of the treasure, hiding its true value in illusions, causing confusion among the dwarves and intrigue among the gods. The result was chaos. Thor nearly seized the dwarves in frustration, while Odin's advisors argued over the authenticity of the gift. Loki watched from the shadows, fascinated by the chain reaction his actions had triggered. And yet, beneath his amusement, he felt a pang of unease, a reminder that cleverness unchecked could hurt even those he cared for. He sought Thor afterward, hoping to explain, yet anticipating the Thunderer's temper. "Brother," he said softly, "it was only a game. Nothing broken beyond repair." Thor, fists clenched and eyes flashing, shook his head. "Nothing is ever only a game, when lives and trust are at stake. You must learn, Loki, that cleverness is a gift, but also a responsibility. Loki nodded, understanding the lesson even as a spark of defiance lingered. The line between mischief and chaos was thin, and walking it required both care and foresight. Venturing into Jotunheim, Loki encountered giants who were both curious and wary of his reputation. Here his tricks were more daring. He swapped paths in a frozen canyon, made snow drifts appear as cliffs, and even mimicked voices to lead groups astray. Some giants laughed, others roared in frustration, yet all were impressed by the subtlety of his craft. But one trick went too far. A giant, misled by Loki's illusions, nearly fell into a chasm. Loki intervened just in time, saving the giant, yet the incident left a mark upon him. The thrill of cleverness was now tinged with the memory of near harm. He realized that mischief could amuse, delight, or teach, but also destroy if wielded without care. This lesson became a guiding principle in Loki's life. Every shadow he cast, every whisper of deception carried consequence. The 9 worlds were not merely playgrounds. They were living, breathing, interconnected realms where actions rippled far beyond the immediate. By the time Loki returned to Asgard, he had grown in both skill and understanding. His games were no longer mere entertainment. They were explorations of possibility, of morality, of cause and effect. Thor, still exasperated but patient, acknowledged the boy's cleverness, while Odin observed with quiet anticipation, knowing that the path of mischief would one day intertwine with destiny in ways even the gods could not foresee. One night, as stars shimmered over the golden halls, Loki stood alone on a balcony. He whispered to the wind, "I am the spark in the shadow, the twist in the tale, the question that bends the world. I am mischief, yes, but I am more. I am possibility, and the 9 realms shall remember me for all I am and all I will become." And in that whisper, carried across mountains, forests, and rivers, the first echoes of legend were sown. The child of mischief had taken his first true steps into a life that would shape gods and mortals alike, weaving laughter, shadow, and consequence into the fabric of eternity. Time flowed differently for Loki than it did for others. Days passed in games, explorations, and small deceptions, yet he felt each moment expand with possibility. The lessons of consequence, the thrill of cleverness, and the subtle weight of responsibility wove themselves into the fabric of his being. He was no longer merely a child. He was a force of shadow and light, a spark of mischief destined to leave its mark on the 9 realms. One evening he journeyed to the forests of Alfheim, where silver leaves shimmered in the twilight. There he discovered a gathering of sprites and minor spirits, beings of delicate power, who danced among the trees and whispered secrets to the wind. Loki, curious and mischievous, joined their circle. He wove illusions of sparkling light, made the shadows bend and twist, and created small wonders that delighted and startled the sprites alike. Yet even in play he learned subtlety. One misstep, a shadow too dark, a trick too abrupt, caused fright among the spirits. Loki paused, his mind racing, and gently corrected the illusion, restoring harmony. In that moment he realized a truth he would carry for a lifetime. Even mischief could not exist without understanding, even trickery required balance, and every act bore consequence beyond the eyes that watched. Back in Asgard, Loki's exploits began to attract attention. Stories of the clever child spread through the halls. How he had outwitted the All-Father's messengers, tricked giants without harming them, and guided mortals and creatures alike through dangers they could not comprehend. Some whispered his name with awe, others with mild fear, Yet all recognized the spark that marked him as unique. Thor, growing more patient in his understanding of the boy, approached Loki one day while he played by the shore of a river in Midgard. "You are clever, Loki," Thor said, his voice a mixture of warning and respect. "But one day your mischief will reach farther than any of us can imagine. Will you guide it with care, or will it become a storm none can control?" Loki, smiling softly, replied, "I will guide it, brother, as one guides the wind. Sometimes swift, sometimes subtle, always moving. And even when storms come, perhaps they will teach as much as they destroy." Thor chuckled, shaking his head. "You are trouble, child of mischief. But perhaps the worlds need trouble after all." Loki's first major solo adventure came when he ventured to the mountains of Jotunheim, seeking a rare flower said to bloom only under moonlight on the highest peak. Giants guarded the slopes, but Loki, small and cunning, wove illusions to conceal his passage. He shifted into a cloud, then mist, then shadow, slipping past their watchful eyes. When he reached the flower, its petals glowed like silver fire. Loki plucked it carefully, returning to Asgard with proof that cleverness and patience could triumph where strength alone might fail. This adventure became a story told for generations, not of brute force but of wit, courage, and careful thought. It marked a turning point, showing that Loki's talents were more than pranks. They were the early steps of a legend that would ripple through the 9 realms. As the child of mischief grew, he began to understand the duality within himself, a being capable of delight and chaos, of laughter and shadow, of cleverness that could heal or harm. He explored illusions and enchantments, forged small alliances with giants and dwarves, and learned the delicate art of persuasion. He understood that his power was not measured by brute force, but by the effect it had upon others, the worlds, and even himself. One night, under a sky thick with stars, Loki whispered to the wind, "I am neither holy god nor holy giant, neither wholly right nor wholly wrong. I am the question in the story, the shadow and the light, the spark that turns the world. And though my path may twist and bend, I will leave my mark upon the 9 realms, in ways yet unseen, in ways yet remembered." The wind carried his words across mountains, rivers, forests, and seas. The echoes touched the hearts of mortals, whispered among the trees, and stirred the clouds above Asgard. And thus, the legend of Loki, child of mischief, master of shadows, spark of possibility, was truly begun. Loki, now grown beyond the small boy of mischief, felt the pull of the worlds beyond Asgard's golden halls. Curiosity burned in him like a quiet flame, a desire to see, to understand, and to play with the edges of reality itself. No longer content with games within the palace, he ventured outward, weaving paths between realms, where forests whispered secrets and rivers shimmered with hidden magic. He began in Alfheim, where the light of the silver trees bent and danced with his illusions. Here he learned the delicate balance of subtle magic, conjuring illusions that made paths shift, leaves sparkle, or creatures appear that were only partly real. He delighted in the dance of perception and reality, watching as elves paused, startled, then laughed, realizing that the shadows of the forest had been shaped by a clever mind. From Alfheim, Loki traveled to Svartalfheim, the realm of dwarves and master craftsmen. Here his wit was tested. He traded riddles for enchanted objects, made illusions that puzzled even the cleverest smiths, and uncovered secrets hidden within stone and metal. Yet even in these playful encounters he learned patience. A trick poorly executed could anger not only dwarves, but gods who relied upon their skill. One day in the twisting mountains of Jotunheim, Loki encountered a giantess who had lost her way. Rather than scaring her or mocking her fear, Loki used his shape-shifting to guide her safely back to her hall. The journey was filled with laughter and clever diversions, teaching Loki that mischief could be a tool for protection, not only amusement. Yet mischief often brought consequence. A misplaced illusion in a Jotunheim courtyard led to a minor quarrel among the giants. Loki observed from a distance, realizing that even harmless intentions could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways unseen. The lesson took root: cunning and responsibility must coexist. Loki's travels also brought him to Midgard. Here, mortals did not understand the magic behind his movements, yet they felt its presence. He guided travelers lost in forests, redirected rivers that threatened to flood villages, and whispered hints to mortals that led them to safety. Some believed the gods walked among them, others thought the wind itself had shifted to help. And in every step, Loki learned the subtlety of influence. Power wielded without care could become chaos, but power guided with wisdom could become wonder. During his journeys, Loki often crossed paths with Thor, the Thunderer. Their encounters were a mix of rivalry and camaraderie. Thor, ever strong and direct, challenged Loki in ways that tested his wits rather than his power. In one forest glade, Thor attempted to trap Loki in a magical circle designed to confine him. Loki, however, laughed softly and slipped through the shadows, leaving behind only a whisper and a trail of illusions that confounded even the Thunderer. "Your tricks grow bolder with each day," Thor said, his voice carrying both frustration and admiration. "Do you intend to teach me patience, or simply amuse yourself at my expense?" Loki bowed with a flourish, a glint in his eyes. "Perhaps both, brother. Perhaps both." In the twilight of one journey, Loki found himself in a hidden valley where rivers met the edge of the sky. He discovered creatures unknown even to the dwarves. Small serpents of light that shimmered like stars, birds that sang with the voices of forgotten gods, and plants that seemed to move with their own consciousness. Loki studied them, learning not only their magic, but also the delicate balance of life that existed even in realms untouched by Asgard. These experiences shaped him. He realized that his cleverness, his tricks, and his curiosity were tools, powerful yes but fragile if misused. Each action carried consequences, each illusion touched a life. Loki began to understand that the path of a trickster was not merely one of amusement, but of responsibility, observation, and, when necessary, protection. By the end of these early journeys, Loki had begun to carve a name for himself across the 9 worlds. Stories whispered among dwarves, elves, giants, and even mortals spoke of the clever wanderer, the master of illusions, the child of mischief who could slip unseen, twist perception, and alter the course of events with a glance or a whisper. Yet he remained humble in his own eyes, understanding that power was never absolute. The worlds were vast, and even a god of cunning could not control all that moved within them. The trickster's path, Loki realized, was endless, filled with lessons, games, and discoveries, each step preparing him for the greater challenges yet to come. Loki's adventures had grown bolder. No longer content with harmless illusions, he began testing the limits of his cunning, manipulating events that would ripple across realms. Each act was a game, yet each game carried weight, for the worlds were finely balanced, and even gods could be nudged into unexpected consequences. In Jotunheim, Loki encountered a council of giants debating a tribute owed to Asgard. Using his shape-shifting abilities, he disguised himself as a minor giant and whispered doubts into the ears of the council. They argued fiercely, delaying their tribute, unaware that a trickster of Asgard guided their words. Thor, alerted by a minor delay in Asgard's stores, followed the trail and found Loki laughing amid the stones and snow. "You are impossible," Thor growled, though the spark of admiration lingered. "You manipulate giants as if they were pieces on a board." Loki bowed theatrically. "And yet the board plays itself, brother. I merely suggest the moves." In Svartalfheim, Loki's games grew subtler. He visited a dwarven forge, where artisans labored to craft weapons for the gods. Loki, intrigued by the interplay of skill and magic, created illusions within the metal itself. A sword that seemed to glow in moonlight, a shield that shimmered with protective runes. The dwarves, initially perplexed, soon marveled at the creations, unaware of the boy's hand. Yet one miscalculation caused the forge's fire to flare too brightly, singeing a craftsman's cloak. Loki, realizing the risk, quickly disguised the incident as a sudden draft, saving the dwarves from blame and himself from consequence. From these moments, Loki began to understand the delicate balance between cleverness and care. Mischief could amuse or enlighten, yet it could also harm. The responsibility of foresight became part of his craft, intertwining with the thrill of invention. Midgard offered lessons of a different kind. Loki observed mortals struggling against natural forces, floods, storms, and predators. He intervened, creating illusions that guided them to safety, altering paths subtly, or whispering hints disguised as wind and birdsong. One fisherman, lost in a fog-laden river, found the currents shifting gently to carry his boat home, unaware that a god of mischief had guided him. Yet Loki also experimented with more daring games. He once disguised himself as a shadow in a village marketplace, leading merchants and travelers into harmless confusion. People laughed when the shadow shifted, believing it a natural trick of light. But in the distance, a band of thieves, also diverted by his illusions, stumbled into a trap of their own making. Loki realized that even playful interventions could influence fate, teaching him that subtlety could wield power as effectively as force. Among the gods, Loki's cleverness began to stir admiration and unease alike. Odin, observing quietly, saw the growth of a mind that could bend perception and reality. "He is no longer merely mischief," Odin said to a council of elders. "He is a force that will shape the course of events. Watch him closely, for his games are becoming lessons with consequences." Thor, meanwhile, continued his unpredictable dance with Loki. Sometimes he was frustrated, sometimes amused, yet always aware that the boy's cunning had grown to rival even the wisdom of the All-Father. Their paths crossed frequently, whether in playful contests or interventions of consequence. Each encounter tested not only Loki's cleverness but also his understanding of restraint and responsibility. The first truly significant deception occurred in a glade between Asgard and Jotunheim. Loki discovered a hidden artifact, a crystal that could reveal hidden truths when touched by the worthy. He created an illusion that disguised it as a simple stone and observed who approached. Thor, curious as ever, recognized the trick too late, and his hammer barely missed the stone before Loki revealed its true nature. "You see," Loki said with a sly grin, "perception is everything. What you seek may not be what you find, and what you see may hide the truth entirely." Thor shook his head, half exasperated, half admiring. "You are more dangerous than I imagined, Loki. Not because of your power but because of your mind." Loki's heart swelled with pride, tempered by the lessons learned. Cleverness, he realized, could amuse, manipulate, protect, and destroy. The line between play and consequence was delicate, and every trick carried the weight of responsibility. By the end of this phase of his journeys, Loki had solidified his reputation across multiple realms. Giants whispered of the clever wanderer who could turn their counsels into chaos without lifting a hand. Dwarves marveled at the unexpected enchantments that bore the mark of his subtle hand. Mortals felt guidance in their lives without understanding its origin, sensing safety, curiosity, and wonder. Thor and Odin observed with a mixture of awe, frustration, and respect, knowing that Loki's path would intertwine with destiny in ways yet unseen. Loki, for his part, understood that his mischief had grown beyond play. He was a trickster, yes, but also a teacher, a guardian, a shadow weaving between worlds. And though consequences awaited, he embraced them with the grin of one who walks the thin line between chaos and order. Loki's cleverness had matured into a power that could shift the currents of the 9 realms. No longer content with small pranks, he began to weave his illusions into the fabric of fate itself, testing both gods and mortals. Each deception carried weight, and each act set ripples across the worlds, sometimes subtle, sometimes profound. In Jotunheim, Loki discovered a quarrel between 2 clans of giants over a sacred glacier. Using his illusions, he made one clan believe that the glacier was slowly melting under the other's care. Arguments escalated, tempers flared, and Loki watched, unseen, as the giants began to move carefully, protecting the glacier in ways they never would have imagined. His trick had caused conflict, yes, but also vigilance and preservation. Thor, sensing disruption, arrived with his hammer raised. Yet when he saw the glacier preserved and the giants unknowingly cooperating, he realized the boy's cunning had prevented disaster. "You meddle far too deeply," Thor said, exasperated. "Yet, perhaps there is merit in your ways." Loki smiled, shadows flickering around him. "Merit often wears the mask of mischief, brother." In Svartalfheim, Loki's cunning faced a more delicate challenge. A group of dwarves had created a chest of enchanted gold, meant to reward heroes of Asgard. Loki, intrigued, disguised the chest as a simple wooden box. Yet when mortals stumbled upon it in Midgard, believing it ordinary, he realized that his actions could unintentionally affect lives beyond his immediate observation. He followed the travelers invisibly, subtly guiding them away from danger and back toward their village. The chest returned safely to its intended guardians, and Loki reflected, cleverness alone could not guarantee safety. His mind had grown sharper, but responsibility had grown as well. Mischief could delight or destroy, and the trickster must tread carefully. Midgard became Loki's classroom for understanding consequence. He observed humans navigating floods, storms, and wild beasts. Sometimes he intervened subtly. A riverbank shifted just enough to prevent a flood. A wolf was guided away from a child. A lost traveler found their path through a whisper in the wind. Each act of hidden guidance taught Loki the dual nature of influence. To act was to affect, to observe was to learn, and every step carried unseen ripples. Yet Loki also tested limits. In one village he conjured a phantom shadow that moved independently, puzzling villagers for hours. Fear, laughter, curiosity, each emotion was a thread he could pull. By the time the illusion faded, he had studied reactions, noted habits, and understood that mischief could teach lessons as much as it could amuse. But he also noted the potential for harm, a lesson he would not forget. Among the gods, Loki's reputation grew. Odin, ever watchful, observed his grandson's growing influence with both approval and concern. "He bends perception and reality," Odin said to a council of elders, "yet the boy learns the weight of every action. He is cleverer than any child, and yet every lesson carries consequence." Thor, despite repeated frustrations, could not help but admire Loki's skill. "You are impossible," he admitted quietly, "yet your mind is sharper than the sword of any warrior. Do not let cleverness blind you to the lives you touch." Loki, grinning from the shadows, replied softly, "Cleverness is the tool, but care is the guide. I am learning, brother. Every shadow, every whisper, every twist is a step forward." By the close of this period of adventures, Loki's first major lessons in consequence were complete. Actions, even playful, ripple across realms. Cleverness must be balanced with care or chaos may follow. Influence, subtle or overt, carries responsibility. Mischief is not mere entertainment, it can shape perception, fate, and memory. He returned to Asgard with new wisdom hidden beneath his trademark grin. Thor met him at the gates. "You have learned much, Loki," Thor said. "And yet I suspect your lessons have only just begun." Loki laughed softly, a sound like wind through the treetops. "Indeed, brother. The paths of trickery are endless and the 9 realms are vast. I have only begun to walk them fully." And with that, Loki looked to the horizon, where the mountains of Jotunheim met the forests of Midgard, where rivers wound like silver threads, and where the stars above whispered secrets yet untold. The trickster's paths had begun in earnest, and the worlds themselves would tremble, laugh, and wonder at the shadow he would cast. As Loki wandered farther from Asgard, the consequences of his cleverness began to deepen. The 9 realms themselves seemed to respond to his presence. Rivers shimmered in unusual patterns, forests whispered secrets of old, and the winds carried messages that only he could hear. Each journey, each trick, each illusion had its echo, teaching the trickster the subtle weight of influence. In Jotunheim, a quarrel between frost giants threatened to spill into battle. Loki, observing from a ridge of ice, knew he could intervene. With illusions of shifting landscapes and phantom armies, he guided the giants into cautious negotiation. What might have been bloodshed became compromise, though the giants were unaware of the guiding hand. Loki understood something crucial. Even deception could protect, and even shadows could preserve life. Yet not every consequence was as neat. In Svartalfheim, a clever ruse involving a hidden gem and a rival group of dwarves backfired slightly. A forge was damaged and tempers flared. Loki rushed to undo the harm, learning that foresight was as important as cunning. Cleverness without care could bring ruin, even unintentionally. From these mistakes, he grew wiser, tempering mischief with responsibility. Midgard offered the trickster new challenges. Humans, fragile yet resilient, were more unpredictable than giants or dwarves. Loki's illusions sometimes frightened, sometimes amazed. One time he disguised a narrow mountain pass as a bridge of light, guiding travelers safely across a chasm. But the trick drew curious onlookers who misread the illusion and nearly stumbled into danger. Loki intervened just in time, guiding the humans with whispers and subtle adjustments. It was in these moments that Loki began to understand his own duality. He could amuse and confuse, guide and endanger, delight and frustrate. Mischief was his nature, but the lives of those around him, mortal and immortal, demanded a subtle wisdom he had only begun to grasp. Among the gods, Loki's reputation for cunning grew. Odin, ever watchful, observed his grandson with quiet contemplation. The boy is cleverer than many, and his mind moves where others cannot see, he remarked. Yet even wisdom must be tempered with foresight. Mischief, if unchecked, can shape worlds as surely as thunder. Thor, meanwhile, continued his intermittent pursuit. Often frustrated, often amused, the Thunderer observed Loki's growth with admiration mixed with exasperation. "You weave shadows into the tapestry of the worlds," Thor said one day, "and yet even your shadows can teach. Take care, Loki. Mischief is powerful, but responsibility is stronger." Loki, grinning from a shadowed cliff, replied, "I learn, brother. Every game teaches, every trick unfolds a lesson. I am both the shadow and the spark that moves the worlds." One of Loki's greatest lessons came during a journey to Alfheim. A rare event, the bloom of the silver moonflowers, was said to bring visions of hidden truths. Loki, ever curious, sought to witness it. Yet the bloom drew more than he expected. Spirits of the forest, wandering elves, and even minor deities arrived to witness the spectacle. Loki played lightly among them, bending light and shadow to enhance the experience. Some were startled, some delighted, but all were enchanted. He realized then that mischief could be a gift, that cleverness could inspire awe, and that even playful illusions could reveal deeper truths. From that night onward, Loki understood that the power of a trickster lay not only in deception, but in shaping perception, guiding understanding, and teaching without force. By the end of this period of his journeys, Loki had matured into a figure whose cunning was legendary. Across the 9 worlds, giants spoke of a shadow who could twist their counsels and turn quarrels into lessons. Dwarves marveled at sudden creations born of illusion and cleverness. Mortals whispered tales of guidance felt but unseen. Gods recognized that Loki's mind could match any challenge, bending fate with subtlety and insight. And Loki himself began to see his path, not merely a trickster but a force of change, a master of shadows and perception, a wanderer whose steps would touch lives in ways small and immense. The trickster's paths were no longer just adventures, they were the shaping of destiny itself, threads of chaos and guidance woven delicately across the 9 realms. Loki's reputation as a cunning wanderer had spread, and with it came challenges he had never faced before. A mysterious summons arrived from the depths of Jotunheim. The Frost King himself requested his presence, intrigued by tales of the trickster who moved between realms like wind through trees. Curious, Loki accepted, traveling alone through icy passes and frozen rivers. The Frost King greeted him not with hostility, but with a game, a puzzle of paths carved into the glacier, where stepping wrong would release torrents of frost or awaken hidden spirits. Here, Loki's cleverness was tested in ways the 9 realms had never seen. His mind had to anticipate not just movement, but perception itself, navigating illusions within illusions. Hours passed as Loki twisted, leapt, and reshaped shadows. He whispered to the winds, spoke in riddles to the icy spirits, and at last reached the heart of the glacier, a crystalline chamber filled with frozen echoes of ancient events. The Frost King applauded quietly. "Few can move so lightly between worlds, young trickster. You have seen the weight of subtlety." Loki bowed, a sly grin touching his lips. "And yet, the game is never truly done, is it?" On another journey, Loki discovered the hidden heart of Svartalfheim, a forge that created not weapons but dreams in metal. Each hammer strike shaped visions, not blades, and the dwarves struggled to control the creations. Loki, unseen, manipulated shadows and light, guiding the tools subtly so that a sword might shine with hope rather than anger, a shield might hum with courage rather than fear. The dwarves were perplexed, attributing the subtle perfection to the whim of the forge itself. Loki slipped away, leaving behind a whisper of his presence and a lesson that cleverness could create beauty as well as mischief. In Midgard, Loki's first truly memorable intervention occurred during the Festival of Harvest, where humans celebrated abundance but faced sudden peril. A storm brewed too fierce for their small fields. Loki, in the guise of a wandering traveler, guided the villagers to safe ground, yet also orchestrated illusions of falling harvests and shifting paths. The humans learned to anticipate change, to adapt, and to discover courage they did not know they possessed, all without understanding that a god had walked among them. That night, children told stories of a shadow that played with the wind and danced with light, teaching bravery and cleverness at once. Loki, watching from afar, realized that his greatest games were those that shaped perception, courage, and understanding, not merely amusement or confusion. Even among the gods, Loki's cleverness began to influence decisions in subtle ways. During a council in Asgard, he discreetly switched two messages of import, one warning about Jotunheim, another about Midgard. The swap created confusion, but also revealed weaknesses and hidden strengths in strategy. Odin noticed the subtle insight, Thor grumbled at the meddling, and Heimdall shook his head at the trickery, but all acknowledged that Loki's actions had prevented disaster in a manner only the trickster could achieve. Loki, as ever, observed quietly, noting reactions, learning subtleties, and understanding the power of timing and perception. Mischief was now inseparable from insight. Games were inseparable from lessons. The climax of this block came when Loki stumbled upon a secret gathering of mortal heroes in Midgard, seeking an artifact of power. He decided to test them. He disguised the artifact as a simple stone and created shifting illusions of threats and guidance. The heroes stumbled, learned, and adapted, discovering the artifact and earning their reward through cleverness, courage, and cooperation. From this, Loki realized the deeper truth of his role. He was not merely a trickster, nor only a disruptor, but a teacher, a catalyst, a force that could illuminate the paths of gods, mortals, and creatures alike. The legend of Loki, the master of perception, shadow, and consequence, was no longer only whispered among dwarves and giants, but etched subtly in the fabric of the 9 realms. Loki had grown, no longer the child of playful mischief, but a young god whose cunning rivaled even the sharpest minds of Asgard. His presence was subtle yet undeniable, a flicker of shadow at the edge of vision, a whisper that hinted at truths others overlooked, a spark of unpredictability that could turn order into opportunity. The halls of Asgard were his first stage. Loki moved among them as a shadow weaving light and trickery together. A goblet might tip, a tapestry shimmer oddly, or a whisper of mischief reach the ears of the Thunderer. Gods noticed, but often too late. By the time Thor or Heimdall sought the source, Loki had vanished, leaving only a hint of laughter and a small lesson hidden in the folds of chaos. One day, during a council convened by Odin to discuss alliances with Jotunheim, Loki could not resist interference. He whispered subtly into the ears of advisors, nudged documents from one table to another, and cast minor illusions to make maps shift slightly. The result? A misalignment of expectations that caused discussion to shift focus. Thor, noticing the subtle disruption, frowned but found that no disaster occurred. Indeed, the council arrived at unexpected insights because of Loki's manipulations. "You are playing a dangerous game," Thor growled later, cornering Loki in a corridor lined with gold and runes. "Perhaps," Loki replied, bowing lightly. "But even dangerous games teach truths no other method can reveal." The trickster's influence was not limited to councils. During feasts, Loki enjoyed testing the gods' perceptions. He might enchant a dish to appear as one delicacy and taste as another, or create illusions of abundance to see how greed and desire would shape behavior. Some laughed, others were annoyed, but all were subtly reminded that appearances could deceive, that perception could be guided, and that order was never absolute. Yet not all of Loki's deeds were trivial. In one notable incident, he manipulated the movements of Thor's hammer during a training exercise, creating the illusion that Mjolnir moved with a mind of its own. Thor struggled, fumbling as if the very laws of gravity had shifted. Loki, observing with careful delight, learned the thrill of testing power without breaking it, guiding events without resorting to violence. Loki's mischief began to intertwine with lessons of responsibility. The first time his trickery backfired, he nearly caused a quarrel between two allied factions of dwarves in Svartalfheim. Realizing the potential for real harm, Loki quickly disguised himself as a mediator, carefully untangling misunderstandings, restoring trust, and leaving only subtle signs of his intervention. From this, he understood that cleverness alone was insufficient. Wisdom, foresight, and empathy were required to wield influence safely. In quiet moments, Loki would retreat to the high balconies of Asgard, gazing across the 9 worlds. The wind whispered through the golden towers, carrying memories of his childhood mischief, the lessons of his travels, and the echoes of the mortal realms below. He understood that every shadow he cast, every trick he orchestrated, had consequences far beyond the immediate. And he smiled, knowing that the path of the trickster was not one of simplicity, but of complexity, challenge, and eternal discovery. Among the gods, Loki's reputation grew unevenly. Some admired his cunning, others feared it, and a few envied the subtle power he wielded without brute force. Odin watched silently, weighing each of Loki's steps, knowing that the boy of mischief was now a young god whose influence could shape alliances, reveal hidden truths, and in time alter destinies. Even Thor, frustrated by repeated cleverness, found lessons in Loki's actions. "You will test all of us," Thor said once, his voice booming with both exasperation and respect. "And yet, perhaps the 9 realms are stronger for it. Be mindful, Loki, your cleverness can enlighten or destroy." Loki's grin was quiet, almost imperceptible. "And I shall choose when to enlighten, and when to simply observe," he replied. "The worlds are mine to learn, and the games are endless." Loki's cleverness had matured into a tool capable of shaping outcomes far beyond mere amusement. In Asgard, whispers of his manipulations had begun to spread, drawing both admiration and wary attention. Gods and mortals alike felt the subtle influence of his actions, even if they did not perceive their source. The first true conflict arrived unexpectedly. Heimdall, guardian of the Bifrost, discovered that messages from distant realms had been subtly altered, causing confusion among allied forces. Loki, curious, had only tested the limits of perception, swapping letters and shifting details to see how the gods would react. The result, however, rippled beyond his expectations. Minor skirmishes erupted, and tensions arose between realms that had long been aligned. Thor stormed into Loki's chamber, Mjolnir raised. You have caused chaos where none should exist, he roared. Loki, lounging casually, met Thor's glare with calm amusement. Chaos is merely order you do not yet understand, brother. I only nudged the threads. The patterns revealed themselves naturally. Thor's jaw tightened, yet he could not deny that the disruptions, while alarming, also revealed hidden strengths and weaknesses among allies. Loki had created a test that neither gods nor mortals fully comprehended. In Svartalfheim, Loki's cleverness led to unintended consequences when he tricked rival dwarf clans into believing a precious gem had been stolen. The illusion sparked a tense confrontation that could have escalated into violence. Recognizing the danger, Loki intervened at the last moment, guiding the dwarves to discover the truth without harm. He had learned that even the most subtle manipulations could have tangible effects, and that foresight must accompany every trick. Meanwhile, in Jotunheim, Loki's illusions disguised a hidden pass, redirecting a band of giants away from a vulnerable village in Midgard. Some giants grew suspicious of the phantom paths, leading to arguments and mistrust among them. Loki observed from a distance, realizing that even protective acts could ignite conflict if misperceived. The lesson was clear. Cleverness was double-edged, capable of creating both resolution and discord. Loki's mischief reached the mortal realms in subtler ways. Travelers lost in Midgard's dense forests encountered illusions that altered their perception of paths, rivers, and landmarks. Some panicked, others adapted. Children whispered stories of a shadow guiding them safely through danger, while adults believed the forest itself had become enchanted. Loki reveled in the subtle impact, learning how to influence without being seen, teaching without being noticed. Even the gods began to notice the scope of his power. Odin observed quietly from Hlidskjalf, seeing that Loki's manipulations, while sometimes irritating, often revealed truths and vulnerabilities the All-Father could not perceive. The trickster's mind moves where none else can, Odin mused. Yet every shadow casts consequence, every whisper shapes fate. One notable incident tested Loki's cunning like never before. During a feast in Asgard, a minor disagreement between two deities threatened to escalate into open argument. Loki, ever observant, subtly redirected conversations, swapped tokens, and created illusions that exaggerated certain gestures while softening others. The result: conflict diffused, harmony preserved, and lessons learned, all without anyone realizing the cause of the resolution. Thor, witnessing the outcome, shook his head. You are more than mere mischief, Loki. You weave solutions as easily as you weave trouble. Loki inclined his head, a glint in his eyes. The worlds are threads, brother. I only pull where the weave is too rigid, and sometimes where it frays. By the end of these early conflicts, Loki's reputation solidified. Among gods he was recognized as both a genius and a potential threat. Mortals whispered tales of guidance and confusion, never fully understanding the trickster behind the events. Giants and dwarves learned to respect and fear the clever wanderer, aware that subtlety could be more dangerous than raw power. Loki himself understood that influence carried responsibility. Cleverness alone was insufficient. Foresight, empathy, and restraint were equally vital. Loki, standing atop a cliff overlooking Midgard, whispered to the wind, I am shadow and spark, question and answer. Where order fails I move. Where caution sleeps I awaken. The worlds will remember not just my tricks, but the lessons hidden within them. The path of the trickster is long, and I walk it freely. And so, Loki's early confrontations among gods and mortals marked the beginning of a new stage. The trickster was no longer merely playful, but a force whose cunning shaped destinies, tested courage, and stretched the bounds of perception across the 9 realms. Loki's mind had grown sharper and his ambitions bolder. No longer content with subtle manipulations, he began orchestrating elaborate gambits that tested the patience, perception, and morality of both gods and mortals. Every illusion, every whispered suggestion, became part of a carefully constructed game whose consequences extended far beyond Asgard's golden halls. One morning, Loki discovered that a sacred ritual intended to bless the harvest in Midgard had been disrupted by natural misfortune. He saw opportunity, not merely to amuse himself, but to challenge the gods' assumptions. Shifting his form into a wandering traveler, he approached the mortals and the attending priests. With careful illusions, he magnified small missteps, introduced phantom obstacles, and altered the flow of offerings. The mortals struggled, adapted, and ultimately succeeded in completing the ritual more efficiently than if no trick had occurred. The gods noticed the unusual precision and whispered among themselves. Odin smiled faintly, recognizing the trickster's influence, while Thor's brow furrowed in frustration, sensing chaos hidden within order. Loki watched silently, satisfied that his design had forced growth, risk, and learning, both for mortals and the gods. Loki's next gambit was far more ambitious. He traveled to the halls of the Vanir, whose council debated the sharing of knowledge and magic with Asgard. Disguised as a wandering messenger, Loki secretly altered words in agreements and subtly suggested interpretations that would provoke debate. The Vanir, confused yet intrigued, eventually arrived at a consensus that balanced power more equitably than any proposal had predicted. Thor, accompanying Loki at the borders of the Vanir lands, confronted him. "You meddle with agreements meant to bind worlds together," Thor exclaimed, his voice echoing across the valley. Loki's smile was calm. "Sometimes, brother, agreements require perspective. I merely provided a new lens." Thor exhaled sharply. "And yet, the lens could have shattered the bonds entirely." Loki tilted his head, eyes glinting. "And yet it did not. That is the art of perception, not brute force." In Asgard, Loki's cleverness began to attract attention from allies and rivals alike. Freya, intrigued by the trickster's influence, approached him for counsel on matters of subtle diplomacy. Loki, recognizing an opportunity, offered guidance in exchange for a game of riddles, testing both wit and wisdom. Their conversations became a dance of intellect, where misdirection and insight interwove seamlessly, leaving both gods enlightened and entertained. Meanwhile, a rival god, brash, prideful, and slow to see beyond immediate appearances, attempted to outwit Loki by setting traps within the palace halls. Loki anticipated these traps, using them to teach lessons rather than to punish. The rival god learned caution, patience, and humility, while Loki cemented his reputation as a master of subtle strategy. Loki also tested mortals in Midgard with increasingly intricate designs. He created labyrinths of light and shadow within forests, guiding lost travelers to uncover hidden resources, hidden knowledge, or lessons in courage. One wandering scholar, led by invisible cues, discovered ancient runes etched upon stones, unlocking knowledge that had been lost for generations. Loki observed silently, realizing that mischief, when paired with subtle guidance, could shape culture, knowledge, and destiny. The most daring of Loki's gambits came when he orchestrated a complex challenge involving all three realms: Asgard, Jotunheim, and Midgard. He manipulated perception, shifted paths, and subtly influenced decisions across vast distances, creating a scenario in which gods, giants, and mortals all had to cooperate unknowingly to avert disaster. The result was a delicate balance achieved through chaos, ingenuity, and intuition, a proof that cleverness, when wisely applied, could unite rather than divide. Odin, watching the outcome from Hlidskjalf, remarked quietly, "The trickster grows beyond mischief. He shapes threads of fate, yet he preserves balance. That is rare indeed." Thor, standing beside him, frowned yet smiled faintly. "He tests everyone, even me. And yet, he teaches without teaching." Loki, unseen, whispered to the wind, "Every shadow, every twist, every hidden path carries the lesson. I am neither destroyer nor savior. I am the question, the spark, the change. And the worlds will bend, learn, and remember because of it." By the end of this period, Loki had become not merely a clever youth, but a figure whose actions left lasting ripples. Gods respected and feared his ingenuity, uncertain when guidance or trickery awaited. Mortals experienced subtle lessons of courage, perception, and problem-solving, forever changed though unaware of the trickster behind them. Giants and dwarves recognized the influence of a mind that could bend circumstance without breaking it. Loki himself understood that mischief could elevate, teach, and protect, as well as amuse, disrupt, or enlighten. The trickster's legacy was beginning to take shape, not in brute force nor in open glory, but in shadows, whispers, and subtle threads of influence woven across the 9 realms. Loki's reputation had grown so vast that even the All-Father could not ignore the consequences of his actions. The boy of mischief had become a young god whose cleverness could shape alliances, alter perceptions, and test the patience of even the most enduring deities. Yet with recognition came challenge. Other gods now sought to counter his influence, to anticipate his moves, and to assert order where he sowed uncertainty. The first true trial arrived when the gods of Asgard convened a competition of skill and intellect. Thor, Heimdall, Freya, and other deities gathered to test their abilities against riddles, feats of strategy, and manipulation of magical forces. Loki was invited, though some expected him to fail or disrupt. He accepted quietly, observing each challenge with keen attention, ready to turn every twist to his advantage. In the opening trial, a puzzle of moving runes required participants to align symbols of power across shifting platforms. Thor relied on sheer strength and instinct, moving quickly but often missing subtle alignments. Loki, studying each rune and observing the reactions of the other gods, adjusted his approach patiently. Where others forced the runes, he guided them, anticipating their natural shifts and the tendencies of the competitors. In the end, he completed the puzzle flawlessly, not by strength, but by perception and subtle influence. His next trial involved negotiation with representatives of Jotunheim and Svartalfheim, testing diplomacy and persuasion. Loki's mastery of perception allowed him to anticipate objections before they were voiced, subtly guiding conversations to reveal hidden motives and intentions. He used humor, riddles, and the occasional illusion to balance the parties' egos, turning potential conflict into compromise. Even Thor, seated nearby, could not help but notice the effectiveness of Loki's subtle hand. "Every word is a weapon," Thor murmured, impressed despite himself. "And every silence is a shield," Loki replied softly, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Midgard offered a trial of a different sort. A sudden outbreak of wildfires threatened a village, and the mortal leaders sought divine guidance. Loki, observing from the shadows, orchestrated a complex solution. Illusions of falling water, shifting winds, and phantom paths guided the villagers to safety while preserving the natural balance of the land. The humans survived, the forests endured, and even minor deities marveled at the subtlety of his intervention. Yet not all trials ended cleanly. During a contest of riddles and perception among the gods, Loki's cleverness provoked envy and suspicion. Some accused him of cheating, claiming that no one could anticipate every twist and turn as he did. Odin, observing silently, allowed the challenge to continue, testing not only Loki's ingenuity but also the patience and judgment of the others. In this crucible, Loki learned that cleverness could breed resentment, and influence could attract both admiration and fear. One of the most daring tests came when Loki encountered a hidden artifact in Asgard, a mirror said to reveal not just reflection but potential, the paths a being might walk in life. The mirror challenged each participant with visions of choice, consequence, and moral ambiguity. Loki approached it cautiously, knowing that every choice could shift perception and destiny. He navigated the illusions with both humor and insight, learning not only about the artifact but about himself, the limits of his cunning, the weight of responsibility, and the inevitability of consequence. The other gods watched in silence, recognizing that Loki's victories were not merely the result of trickery, but of insight, patience, and subtle guidance. Where others relied on strength or authority, Loki relied on understanding, shaping events through observation, wit, and timing. By the end of these trials, Loki emerged recognized not only as a trickster, but as a force whose cleverness could challenge, protect, and teach. He had proven that subtlety could rival power, that guidance could be more influential than command, and that even mischief, when paired with insight, could shape destiny across realms. Loki, standing alone atop a balcony in Asgard, looked across the 9 realms and whispered to the wind, "I am no longer merely a child of mischief. I am observer, guide, and question. I weave shadows where there is rigidity, illuminate paths where there is darkness, and challenge those who think the world is fixed. The trickster's path stretches far, and I walk it freely." The winds carried his words to Midgard, Jotunheim, and beyond, where mortals, giants, and gods alike would sense, in ways unseen, the presence of a mind that could bend perception, alter outcomes, and shape the threads of fate without striking a single blow. The air above Asgard was tense, charged with the weight of anticipation. Loki had tested boundaries, guided mortals, challenged gods, and manipulated events across the 9 realms. Yet now his cleverness would meet direct resistance, a collision that would define the trickster's path for years to come. The confrontation began during the Feast of Seasons, when Thor challenged Loki to demonstrate his loyalty to Asgard. It was not merely a contest of skill, but of judgment, perception, and subtle influence. Loki's task: navigate a series of trials that tested both his cunning and his moral compass, each designed by the gods to push him beyond pranks and minor manipulations. The trickster's capture was neither violent nor ignoble. Loki, ever agile, could have resisted, but he understood the weight of the moment. As the gods approached, he allowed himself to be ensnared, bound with chains forged not of iron but of magic, crafted from the root of Yggdrasil and the venom of Nidhogg. The chains were woven to restrain both body and illusion, yet Loki remained unbroken in spirit. He was led to a cavern beneath Asgard, where shadows shifted and the air trembled with the echoes of fate. There Loki's hands were bound, his magic restrained, yet his mind wandered freely. He contemplated the paths he had walked, the games he had played, the lessons learned, and the mischief yet to come. Even in captivity, Loki's cleverness persisted. He whispered to the winds and shadows, leaving hints for mortals, guidance for allies and lessons for the gods. He understood that influence could transcend physical restraint. A well-placed word, a subtle illusion before the chains took hold, or the quiet observation of events could shape outcomes. Thor visited him in the cavern, hammer in hand but expression softened. "Loki," he said, voice low, "the chains will hold your body but not your mind. Your cleverness is as much a part of you as the blood in your veins. Do not lose sight of who you are even here." Loki's grin was faint, almost imperceptible. "I'm never lost, brother. Chains may bind, but thought and wit are free. And the 9 realms will remember that even shadows leave footprints." In the silence of the cavern, Loki reflected on destiny itself. The prophecy of Ragnarok had been whispered to him in fragments by the All-Father and hinted at in dreams of mortals and gods alike. He knew his role, a catalyst of chaos, a harbinger of change, a shadow whose cleverness would influence the final storm. Yet he also understood subtlety. Influence was not only about destruction but about shaping perception, teaching lessons and guiding hearts. Bound and patient, Loki considered the threads of fate stretching across the 9 realms. Every twist, every shadow, every carefully placed deception was part of a larger tapestry, one that he alone could navigate with wit, foresight, and patience. Even in chains, he was not powerless. He was a force of cunning, awaiting the time when the world itself would bend to the trickster's subtle design. Though Loki's body was restrained within the cavern beneath Asgard, his mind moved freely, sharp and untamed. He studied the patterns of the chains, tracing the flow of magical energy that bound him. Every enchantment, every rune, every thread of magic spoke to him, revealing both the limitations and the possibilities within the restraint. Where others saw imprisonment, Loki saw a puzzle, a challenge to be understood and, eventually, manipulated. He experimented quietly. With whispers to the shadows, he tested the responses of the cavern itself. The slight echoes that hinted at hidden passages, the subtle shimmer of light on runes, and the faint tremors in the earth as the magic of Asgard pulsed through the roots of Yggdrasil. Though he could not break free physically, his influence extended in ways the gods did not fully anticipate. Thor visited frequently, both as a guard and as a companion in thought. "You plan even here, Loki," Thor said, watching the trickster trace invisible patterns in the air. "I plan always," Loki replied, a faint smile curving his lips. "Even shadows have paths, and even chains can be understood. Freedom is often a matter of perception, brother. I am not bound as long as my mind remains unbroken." Thor, sensing the truth of the words, shook his head in amazement. "Your cleverness is as much a weapon as Mjolnir. But be careful, the gods grow less patient with every test." Loki's first true intellectual escape came when he discovered that the chains, though magical, responded to subtle shifts in rhythm and thought. By moving carefully, whispering softly, and observing the natural pulse of the enchantments, he created minor gaps, fleeting moments when the magic's strength faltered. Not enough to flee, but enough to manipulate shadows, slip illusions into the minds of mortals and guide events beyond the cavern walls. In Midgard, farmers noticed the wind shifting strangely, guiding lost travelers home. In Jotunheim, disputes between giants resolved unexpectedly, as if someone had whispered advice from afar. Even in Svartalfheim, dwarves found themselves completing intricate works with uncanny precision, unaware that Loki's subtle guidance had reached across realms. He realized that true freedom did not always require breaking chains. It required mastering the unseen, bending perception, and influencing events without moving a muscle. Yet Loki's confinement also tested his patience. Days turned into weeks, and the solitude pressed upon him. The weight of prophecy, the knowledge that he would play a pivotal role in Ragnarok, weighed heavily on his mind. He contemplated choices, outcomes, and the balance of power. He knew the gods bound him not out of cruelty but necessity. The threads of fate demanded that even the cleverest of tricksters be restrained until the right moment. Still he refused despair. In the quiet of the cavern he refined his mind, studied the histories of the 9 realms, learned the patterns of the mortals below, and considered the weaknesses and strengths of the gods who held him. Each day was a lesson in strategy, subtlety, and foresight. Even bound, Loki was preparing for a future only he could see clearly. One night, under the pale light that filtered through cracks in the cavern ceiling, Loki whispered to the shadows. "Chains may hold the body but not the mind. Every whisper, every reflection, every glance may carry my design. The 9 realms are threads, and I am the shadow between them, the spark that bends perception. My time will come, and the trickster's path will not be denied." Even as he spoke, he sensed the distant stirrings of fate. Ragnarok approached, and his role was set: a catalyst, a shadow, a force whose cunning would shape the storm to come. The chains could bind his form, but they could not restrain the lessons he would teach, the influence he would exert, or the legend he would leave behind. Though bound within the cavern, Loki's mind moved like a river carving paths unseen. He discovered that even the strongest enchantments responded to perception, timing, and subtle manipulation. By observing the flow of magic through Asgard, he learned to guide events without leaving a trace, to whisper suggestions into thoughts, and to craft illusions that reached across realms. One morning, a minor dispute arose among the gods over the placement of wards along the borders of Midgard. Thor and Heimdall debated strategy, each certain of their own method. Loki, hidden within the cavern's shadows, sensed subtle cues: a flicker of light, a whispered pattern in the air, a shadow that shifted just so. The gods, unaware of his influence, adjusted their plans and discovered solutions neither could have anticipated alone. "Someone guides us," Thor murmured, noticing the unexpected clarity. Loki smiled quietly, unseen, the shadows around him rippling in acknowledgement. "Guidance need not be seen," he whispered. Next, Loki turned his attention to mortal affairs. A merchant caravan threatened by bandits found its path altered by sudden fog and subtle shifting of the terrain. Travelers who had wandered from safety were nudged toward hidden paths, unaware that the trickster's shadow guided them. In Jotunheim, quarrels that might have escalated into violence among minor giants were defused by illusions of looming threats and whispered doubts, redirecting attention from conflict to cooperation. Even dwarves, forging weapons for the gods, found their workshops subtly rearranged so that their most intricate designs came together flawlessly, without understanding the hand that guided them. Loki had learned that influence did not require physical action. It required insight, timing, and a touch of mischief. The most ambitious act came during a gathering of the Aesir. Loki, aware that his restraint was being closely monitored, orchestrated a complex illusion that spread across the palace halls. Statues shifted imperceptibly, doors appeared where none existed, and whispers of advice floated through the corridors. Gods and Valkyries pursued shadows and echoes, each believing themselves to be in control, while in reality, Loki observed and subtly nudged outcomes toward harmony rather than chaos. Odin, sensing the subtle shifts, smiled faintly. The trickster moves even while bound. He teaches without touching, shapes without striking, and observes without being seen. Such skill is rare indeed. Thor, frustrated yet impressed, shook his head. You bend reality while chained, Loki. I cannot decide whether to admire or scold you. Loki's grin was quiet. Perhaps both, brother. Both are deserved. Loki also began preparing for the inevitable, Ragnarok. From within his prison he studied the threads of prophecy, tracing hints in dreams, runes, and mortal tales. He experimented with shadows, guiding mortals to uncover fragments of knowledge, creating subtle patterns that might one day serve him and the Nine Realms. Every illusion, every trick, every whispered suggestion became part of a long-term plan, a tapestry woven in secrecy, awaiting the moment of release. One night, he paused atop a shadowed ledge in the cavern, feeling the pulse of the Nine Realms through the roots of Yggdrasil. He whispered, I am bound in body, yet unchained in mind. Every shadow I cast, every subtle touch prepares the path. The worlds will tremble when the time comes, yet I shall move unseen as I always have. The trickster's freedom is never lost, only deferred. By the end of this period, Loki had mastered the art of influence from confinement. He manipulated events across realms without being seen. He tested and guided gods, mortals, giants, and dwarves alike. He prepared the stage for his role in Ragnarok with careful, patient design. He learned that freedom of thought could be more powerful than freedom of movement, and that subtlety was often stronger than force. Even in chains, Loki's legend grew. A mind unbound, a trickster whose influence stretched beyond walls, whose cleverness shaped destiny, and whose shadow prepared for the storm to come. Even in the cavern beneath Asgard, Loki's mind was restless, probing every shadow, every whisper, every ripple of magic. The gods had increased their vigilance, sending Valkyries and Heimdall himself to monitor his movements. Yet Loki had learned long ago that restraint could be circumvented, not through brute force but through subtlety, perception, and patience. One morning, a Valkyrie approached his chamber, expecting to find the trickster plotting a new mischief. Loki, anticipating the visit, had prepared a quiet test. He arranged shadows and faint illusions so that the Valkyrie perceived a corridor shifting endlessly, reflections duplicating him, whispers echoing in multiple directions. The Valkyrie, skilled and alert, paused, noting patterns and inconsistencies, yet could not determine the true origin of the illusions. Loki observed silently, teaching patience, observation, and humility through his subtle manipulation. You grow cleverer, Heimdall later remarked to Odin. Even bound, he shapes perception and tests the senses. His mind moves freely where his body cannot. Odin nodded quietly. The trickster's path is never blocked by chains. His destiny is written in shadows and whispers as much as in prophecy. Loki's next challenge came from within the mortal realms. He noticed a small village in Midgard threatened by a sudden frost, one that would ruin the harvest. Though unable to intervene directly, he used minor illusions and whispered hints through animals, shadows, and the wind. Villagers adapted instinctively. Livestock moved to safe pastures, streams adjusted subtly, and crops were sheltered. No one understood why the change had occurred, yet the outcome preserved life and balance. From this, Loki learned a critical lesson. Influence could extend through patience and observation. One need not act directly to shape outcomes. Subtle guidance could redirect destinies, preparing the world for the greater events yet to come. In Asgard, Loki's cunning extended to political threads. Minor disputes among the gods threatened to escalate due to misunderstandings. Loki subtly nudged words, gestures, and decisions, creating clarity without intervention. A rivalry between two deities softened when he adjusted perceptions of intent. Alliances strengthened as hidden truths became evident through illusions only he could manipulate. Even Thor noticed, "You are dangerous, Loki, not for the tricks you play but for the minds you guide without hands. You shape hearts and perceptions while the world believes itself free." "And that," Loki replied softly, "is the essence of influence. Freedom and guidance are threads that can coexist if the hand that weaves them is careful." The trickster also began to study the prophecy of Ragnarok more intensely. Every fragment of vision, dream, and whisper he could gather became part of a personal map of potential futures. He traced the threads connecting gods, mortals, and giants, discerning the points where his cleverness could tip outcomes, preserve lives, and prepare the stage for the inevitable storm. He experimented quietly, planting subtle signs in Midgard, nudging giants into reconsidering hostilities, and leaving cryptic hints for dwarves to uncover forgotten knowledge. Each act was a seed of destiny, a preparation for the moment when chains would fall and the world would shift under the shadow of the trickster. One evening Loki paused, observing the roots of Yggdrasil through the cavern's faint light. He whispered to the shadows, "I am bound in body but free in thought. Every illusion, every suggestion, every hidden movement plants seeds. The worlds will not see me act, yet they will feel the impact. The threads of fate await, and I will step forward when the time is right. Even in chains I prepare the storm." The winds carried his words across the 9 realms, reaching Midgard's forests, Jotunheim's peaks, and Asgard's golden halls alike. Mortals, giants, and gods alike sensed subtle shifts, unaware of the trickster guiding events from a prison of shadows. By the end of this block, Loki had achieved mastery of influence under confinement. He manipulated perceptions and outcomes without physical freedom. He guided mortals, giants, and gods through subtle interventions. He prepared the groundwork for his role in Ragnarok with foresight and strategy. He solidified his identity as a master of perception, manipulation, and destiny's subtle currents. Loki, though bound in chains, had already begun weaving the threads that would shape the greatest storm the 9 realms had ever seen. Time in the cavern flowed differently. Days, nights, and the faint glimmers of moonlight through cracks in the ceiling marked passage. But Loki's mind moved beyond temporal constraints. Every shadow, every flicker of air, every distant ripple across the 9 realms became a lesson, a thread, a possibility to shape. The chains that bound him could not restrain the reach of thought, nor the designs of a cunning mind. He reflected on the prophecy that had haunted his dreams and whispers. Ragnarok, the end of worlds, the storm that would reshape all that existed, was not a threat but a stage. Loki saw himself not as a pawn, but as an architect of subtle forces, a catalyst whose actions would create outcomes far beyond brute force. The chains were temporary, the legacy eternal. Loki tested his limits within the cavern. He conjured illusions that even the vigilant Heimdall could not fully decipher. Doors that shifted positions, shadows that whispered riddles, phantom passages that led nowhere yet revealed hidden truths. Even Odin, observing from afar, recognized the intricacy of the designs. "The trickster prepares," Odin murmured. "Even bound, he moves pieces none else can see." Thor visited that night, heavy with concern. "Do you not weary of confinement, Loki?" he asked, voice softened by respect. "Confinement teaches patience," Loki replied. "It hones perception. The storm will come, and I will not be caught unprepared. Every shadow I cast now plants a seed for the future, every whisper a lesson in perception and cunning." In Midgard, subtle interventions continued. Crops threatened by frost thrived, travelers guided by instinct found safety, and minor quarrels between villages resolved with unexplained clarity. Mortals felt the guiding presence of a clever hand, though none could know its source. Giants and dwarves likewise experienced small shifts that preserved balance, preparing the realms for the coming upheaval. Through these acts, Loki learned the art of invisible guidance. Influence without force, teaching without visibility, preparation without revelation. He became a master not only of mischief but of destiny itself. One night, Loki traced the runes of fate upon the cavern walls, meditating on connections between gods, giants, and mortals. The visions were intricate, complex, and sometimes disheartening, yet he embraced them fully. Every choice, every action, every subtle nudge became part of a larger design. Chains could hold his body but not his understanding. He whispered to the shadows, "I accept the storm, the prophecy, the role assigned. I do not seek to escape fate but to shape it. When the end comes, I will be both catalyst and witness, trickster and teacher, shadow and spark. The 9 realms will bend, but I will move freely within the threads." In the final weeks before his captivity would end, Loki perfected subtle techniques of influence. He left signs in Midgard for mortals to find forgotten wisdom, guided giants to reconsider hostilities, and nudged dwarves to complete creations that might later aid gods in unforeseen ways. Every seed he planted was deliberate, every whisper calculated, every illusion purposeful. The trickster's path was no longer a game of amusement, it was a design, a preparation for the storm of Ragnarok. Thor, observing from a distance, remarked quietly, "He is more than cunning. He is a strategist, a force that even the gods cannot fully anticipate." Loki, though bound, smiled faintly. "Strategy is but patience with perception, brother. Even chains cannot restrain the mind that moves among shadows." By the end of this period, Loki had achieved mastery of restraint, preparation, and foresight. He accepted the inevitability of Ragnarok while shaping his influence in advance. He guided gods, mortals, giants, and dwarves subtly, preparing the realms for the storm. He consolidated his identity as the trickster, clever, patient, strategic, and a master of unseen influence. He learned that freedom of thought and perception could surpass physical freedom, and that mischief could coexist with foresight and destiny. As Loki rested in the quiet of the cavern, he whispered one final truth to the winds. "Chains may bind my body, yet the threads of fate bend to my mind. The storm will come and I shall be ready. I am the trickster, the shadow and the light, the spark that guides and tests. Even in chains, I prepare the 9 realms for what is to come." And in that whisper, the shadow of the trickster stretched across Asgard, Midgard, and the realms beyond, a silent promise of cunning, preparation, and the inevitability of destiny fulfilled. The skies above the 9 realms darkened with the weight of inevitability. Winds carried whispers of chaos, rivers trembled under unseen forces, and mountains shivered as if anticipating the coming storm. Loki, once bound in the cavern beneath Asgard, now stood free, the chains of magic shattered by time, cunning, and the precise unfolding of destiny. He emerged quietly, a shadow among the golden halls, yet every step resonated across the 9 realms. Mortals, giants, dwarves, and gods alike felt the subtle shift. The trickster was loose, and the threads of fate would bend under his influence. The prophecy of Ragnarok had begun, and Loki's part was no longer hidden in shadows. It was about to manifest fully. Thor approached, hammer in hand, eyes fierce yet measured. "Loki," he said, voice carrying across the wind, "the time has come. Will your cleverness serve the worlds, or will it bring them to ruin?" Loki's grin was quiet, almost unreadable. "Cleverness has always served the worlds, brother. It is the mind that guides, not the hammer. Yet the storm must come, and I will be both spark and shadow within it." The first moments of Ragnarok were marked by chaos unleashed. Giants poured from Jotunheim, fires blazed from Muspelheim, and frost spread from Niflheim. The gods readied themselves, shields and swords gleaming, spells whispered, and strategies formed. Yet Loki did not fight as others did. His weapon was perception, his shield subtlety, his strategy the orchestration of events that none could fully anticipate. In Midgard, mortals felt sudden winds, strange patterns in rivers, and the shifting of shadows that guided them away from danger. Entire armies, giant and human, found themselves maneuvering with uncanny precision, unaware that a single mind had nudged their choices. Loki's influence stretched across realms, unseen but undeniable, shaping the course of battles, saving lives, and ensuring that chaos did not become total annihilation. Even among the gods, his role was crucial. Odin observed silently, recognizing that the trickster's cunning was essential to the unfolding of prophecy. Thor, though frustrated by the unpredictability, relied on Loki's guidance at critical moments, as his clever manipulations turned traps and ambushes into opportunities for survival and strategy. Loki confronted the first wave of giants personally, not with brute force but with deception and guile. He twisted illusions around them. Cliffs shifted, shadows moved like weapons, and phantom allies appeared to redirect the enemy. Giants stumbled and hesitated, unsure where the trickster's magic ended and reality began. In every misstep, Loki guided both friend and foe toward paths that would fulfill destiny while preserving life. Among the chaos, Loki found Freya weaving protective spells over Midgard. He smiled subtly and whispered illusions into the threads, enhancing her magic without altering her intent. "Even in the storm, guidance can be hidden," he murmured. Freya's eyes flickered, sensing the unseen hand. "You are both menace and savior, Loki," she said quietly. "Perhaps," he replied, "but every act now carries its lesson, every shadow its purpose." In the climactic moments, Loki faced Fenrir, the monstrous wolf prophesied to devour gods. The trickster did not charge blindly. He danced around the beast, weaving illusions, guiding Thor and other gods to strike at precise moments, and using perception to limit the wolf's destruction. Though the battle raged, the coordination of cunning, strength, and strategy revealed the genius of Loki's mind. He realized in that moment that his legacy was not only in chaos or mischief, but in shaping outcomes, teaching lessons through action and subtlety, and influencing destinies with intelligence rather than force. By the close of these first hours of Ragnarok, Loki had established himself as more than a trickster. He was a force that could bend perception, guide outcomes, and act as catalyst and teacher alike. The 9 realms trembled, yet survived, shaped as much by subtlety as by strength. His identity, forged in childhood mischief, honed through adventure and tested in chains, had reached its pinnacle. The trickster was both shadow and spark, chaos and guidance, mischief and wisdom. He whispered to the wind across the realms. I am the trickster. I am shadow, spark, and question. The storm comes and I move freely within it. Mortals, giants, gods, none escape the lessons I sow. The 9 realms will remember, for I am the shadow that guides and the spark that ignites destiny. As the skies above the 9 realms burned with fire and ice, Loki moved with precision, unseen yet omnipresent. Where warriors clashed with brute force, he worked subtly, guiding the flow of battle, planting illusions that shifted perceptions, and nudging events that would shape outcomes without revealing his hand. Giants surged across the fields of Midgard, their roars shaking mountains and rivers alike. Mortals armed for defense stumbled, faltered, and adapted in ways unseen, guided by whispers of shadow and flashes of subtle light. Loki had created patterns within chaos, orchestrating a dance that turned fear into clarity and confusion into strategy. Thor, engaged with a monstrous foe, glanced to the side and noticed subtle openings that had not existed moments before. His hammer struck true, following paths that Loki's cunning had arranged. He manipulates even the storm, Thor muttered mid-battle, eyes narrowing with reluctant respect. Loki did not act with brute violence. Against Fenrir, the wolf of prophecy, he employed cunning. Illusions of additional gods, shadows that shifted unpredictably, and sounds that misled the beast's senses. Fenrir hesitated, confused, giving Thor and other Aesir crucial moments to strike with precision. The trickster's cleverness saved lives and ensured that prophecy unfolded with as little irreversible destruction as possible. In Midgard, mortal leaders executed impossible maneuvers, guiding refugees through forests and mountains that seemed to rearrange themselves. Bridges appeared where none existed, river crossings shifted subtly, and phantom paths provided escape from destruction. Villagers would later speak of a shadow that led them without revealing itself, a guiding hand that saved countless lives. Meanwhile, dwarves in Svartalfheim completed enchanted weapons under subtle manipulation. Hammers rang, sparks flew, and runes shimmered in perfect sequence. Loki had prepared these tools months earlier, in quiet influence during his confinement. Now they turned the tide of battles in Asgard and beyond, unnoticed yet decisive. Even among the gods, Loki's strategy unfolded flawlessly. Odin anticipated threats, but Loki's clever manipulations provided solutions invisible to the Allfather's gaze. Minor deities and valkyries followed hints and illusions, finding themselves performing acts that simultaneously countered chaos and preserved allies. Where others relied on strength, Loki relied on foresight and subtle orchestration, proving the power of intellect over brute force. Freya, weaving protective wards, felt the invisible guidance of the trickster. Even now he shapes destiny, she whispered to herself. He is menace, savior, and teacher all at once. As the final hours of the battle approached, Loki orchestrated one of his most daring maneuvers. Using shadows, illusions, and carefully timed manipulations, he directed forces to surround the largest threat, an amalgamation of frost, fire and darkness, without revealing himself. Gods and mortals alike struck from the perfect angle, neutralizing danger while minimizing collateral damage. Thor, exhausted but awed, finally turned to the trickster. "You have saved countless lives today, Loki. Yet even so, your ways are maddening." Loki's smile was faint, enigmatic. "I'm Trickster, brother. I bend perception, I guide threads unseen, and I shape outcomes without need of force. Chaos and order are not enemies, they are tools." By the end of these decisive moments, Loki had proven his mastery of cunning, strategy, and subtle influence. The 9 realms bore the marks of his design: destruction tempered, chaos guided, lives preserved, and prophecy allowed to unfold as destiny intended. He had become more than a trickster. He was a master of perception, a manipulator of fate, and an essential force in the unfolding of Ragnarok. He whispered once more to the wind, carrying his voice across Asgard, Midgard, and Jotunheim. "The storm comes and I am within it, without it, above it. I am shadow and spark, question and guide. The 9 realms will remember the trickster, for I am the hand that shapes without being seen, the mind that moves within fate itself." The 9 realms shook as the final moments of Ragnarok approached. Fire and ice collided, winds howled with fury, and the earth trembled beneath the weight of prophecy. Gods and mortals alike faced impossible choices, yet amidst the chaos, Loki moved with calm precision, a shadow threading through the storm. Fenrir lunged, flames clashed, and the skies split open with lightning, yet Loki's presence guided the outcome. Subtle illusions, whispers of strategy, and carefully orchestrated misdirections allowed allies to act with unforeseen coordination. Each action, each shadow, each spark of perception was part of a larger design. Survival without chaos unchecked, order balanced with inevitability. Thor faced Jormungandr across the battlefield, his hammer striking waves of destruction. Loki, unseen, manipulated perception. Shifting shadows, reflective surfaces, and phantom movements misled the serpent just enough, giving Thor the moments necessary to strike precisely without harming those nearby. Every strike, every counter, was choreographed invisibly by the trickster's mind. Mortals, guided by intuition, navigated deadly terrain with uncanny skill. Bridges appeared at the right moments, rivers parted subtly, and hidden paths revealed themselves. No one knew why, but countless lives were spared. Loki, observing from the fringes of perception, smiled faintly. Influence without recognition was his true art. The climax arrived when the forces of fire and frost converged upon Asgard itself. The gods, fatigued and battered, relied on Loki's subtle orchestration more than they admitted. He directed reinforcements with shadows and whispers, creating gaps in enemy lines and opportunities for counterattack. Fenrir, at last cornered, growled in frustration as illusions distracted and misdirected him, leaving Thor and Odin to deliver precise blows. Yet Loki did not take glory. His satisfaction was quiet, almost imperceptible. The trick was successful because none saw it, because chaos had been shaped into opportunity, because lives were preserved and the prophecy advanced without unnecessary destruction. In the aftermath, as the storm subsided and the 9 realms shuddered from the cataclysm, Loki moved through the ruins with quiet reflection. Mortals rebuilt, giants retreated, and gods assessed the cost of the battle. And everywhere, the subtle marks of his influence remained. Paths cleared, disputes resolved, wisdom imparted without recognition. Thor approached him one last time, weary yet respectful. You have done more than any of us could have expected, he said. Even in mischief your mind shaped the outcome. Loki inclined his head, shadowed smile flickering. Mischief is the brush, brother. Perception is the canvas. Destiny is the painting, and I merely guided its strokes. Finally, Loki stood atop a cliff overlooking Midgard and the remnants of Asgard, the winds carrying echoes of battle and whispered lessons. He spoke to the realms themselves. I am the trickster. I am shadow, spark, question, and guide. Even when storms rage, when flames burn, when ice shatters, I move among them, unseen yet shaping the path. The 9 realms will remember, not the hammer, nor the fire, nor the wolf, but the hand that guided, the mind that foresaw, the trickster who walked freely among shadows. The 9 realms exhaled, sensing resolution, balance restored yet altered forever. Loki's legacy was complete, not as conqueror, not as brute force, but as master of perception, cunning, and destiny itself. As the winds of the 9 realms settle and the echoes of Ragnarok fade, the shadow of the trickster lingers. Loki, child of mischief, master of perception and weaver of fate, has walked the paths of gods, giants, dwarves, and mortals alike. He was never the strongest, nor the loudest, nor the bravest in battle, but he was clever, patient, and unbound in mind. He shaped destinies without being seen, guided hearts without a word, and turned chaos into lessons that would ripple through time. The 9 realms remember him, not merely as a god of mischief, but as a force of change, a spark in the shadow, a question that bends the world. His legacy is not in temples or stone, but in the hearts of those who perceive, who learn, and who dream beyond what is visible. And so, when storms move across the north, when ravens wheel in the sky, when shadows dance at the edge of firelight, remember the trickster. The mind that moves freely, the hand that guides without being seen, the spirit that endures beyond chains and prophecy. For Loki is eternal, not in power but in cunning, not in fear but in thought, not in conquest but in the subtle shaping of worlds. And as you close your eyes tonight, remember, even in the quietest shadow, even in the smallest spark, the trickster walks among us, teaching, guiding, and shaping the endless threads of fate.